So as many of you know, this afternoon we have the privilege of learning with Kyle Clark from 9 News. I'm going to speak just for a moment, about Kyle Clark. But before I do that, just a window into why we bring speakers into our Yom Kippur Afternoon service. We spend so many beautiful hours praying together and singing together and learning from our holy text together. But as you all know, and especially those of you who have been part of this congregation for such a long time, when we walk into these doors of this sanctuary, we do not close off the world. Quite the contrary. We believe very strongly that it is our Jewish tradition that helps us walk through the world. And as a result, we have a practice on Yom Kippur Afternoon of making sure that we connect to that outside world and learn from people who come from all different professions, how they too bring their values and their frame into their profession, into the way that they see their identity. That's our project on Yom Kippur, reestablishing who we are, why we are, and how we are as we move into this next Jewish year. And so it's a great privilege to have Kyle Clark with us, someone who we know thinks a lot about that, both professionally and as a community professional as well. I'm also going to hedge that the bio that I'm going to read right now is something that Kyle sent me. Just saying it out loud. Kyle Clark is a journalist at 9 News, where he has worked since 2007. He is the anchor and managing editor of the 6 p.m. weeknight program Next, leading a team that has been honored 6 times with the Edward R. Murrow Award for Excellence in Innovation. He covers politics and public policy for 9 News and moderates the station's nationally recognized political debates. He also organizes Next's weekly Word of Thanks micro-giving campaigns, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, which have raised $16 million for Colorado's nonprofits since 2020. That's right. And in his spare time, he anchors 9 News at 9 and 10 p.m. For fun, I'm sure, right? Yes. It is my great pleasure to welcome Kyle to join me on the Bima. Yeah, come on. So despite the introduction that I just gave, some people might wonder, why is an anchor or a journalist or someone who looks at the world in that way a good conversationalist for a Yom Kippur afternoon when we are really deep in introspection and reflection? I just would wonder, if you want to explain to people, what do you feel like your job is as an anchor and a journalist? How do you understand how that shapes who you are?
That's a wonderful question. First, thank you for the invitation to join you. Thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces of people in the community that I've criticized over the years. A few that I've complimented, but it's wonderful to see you all. No, I think my job on the simplest level is just to learn about our community and our state, and then to tell other very busy people about our community and our state, people for whom their day-to-day job is not to learn about our community and our state. So at the simplest level, I'm the son of 2 educators, 2 public school teachers, and they instilled in me that one of the greatest things that you can do is to learn about something and then teach someone else. And as a reporter, I'm a generalist. I'm not an expert in anything other than fast learning and then hopefully somewhat effective fast teaching so that other people can then take that information and make the best choices for their life based on their experiences and their values.
So one of the things I think is really interesting is that there are many elements of crossover between the responsibility of an anchor and the responsibility of clergy. And as I just spoke about briefly a minute ago, one of the things that we feel a great pull toward is to help our community understand what is happening. Our job is also then to help people make sense of it and know where to bring it. And sometimes that involves our own personal frames and understandings. So I'd be curious for you, where do you feel like your person comes into your responsibility? Where do you lean on objectivity versus subjectivity? How does that play for you in your position?
I think it starts with the recognition that with respect, any journalist who tells you that they are unbiased is confused. Because for now, journalists are human, and we should celebrate that. You know, we have not yet all been replaced by AI, so
neither have clergy, thank God.
Yes.
So that's good.
So I think that we shouldn't reject that humanness, which means that we shouldn't reflect the fact that we all have biases, we all have lenses through which we see the world, because they're just a product of our experience, right? And as a journalist, it just means that one of my jobs every day is to try and set that aside, except for the times in which I'm actively trying to lean upon that. And certainly some biases are unconscious, and try to recognize that. I do that in a few ways. You know, when I set out on a story or an idea on a thesis, you know, I always try to prove myself wrong, because it's so easy to prove yourself right. It takes no time at all. But I try to prove myself wrong, and if I can't get to that, then I know that at least I've made an honest attempt to examine something in that honest manner. But at the same time, I don't divorce all the rest of the parts of my life from the fact that I'm a journalist. And I feel like that's actually been a positive change in journalism over the last 1 or 2 generations in the business. I think the generation of journalists that told themselves that they were unbiased arbiters of truth were fooling themselves, and often they were just products of the dominant culture, so they moved through life very seamlessly and without much friction, and therefore they felt like they were somehow above it all. And I think that for women in journalism, for minorities in journalism, that's never been the case. And the idea that somebody would never bring a piece of themselves into their work is just, it's just kind of foolishness. So, I am who I am, right? I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a Denverite. I've lived in this city proudly for 18 years. I'm somebody who wants to stay in this city. I'm not just passing through. All of those things inform my work, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. That actually leads me right into my next question for you. And I'll just again share that I think that is an evolution that we've seen in the clergy world also. We spend a lot of time thinking about when do we have to be speaking as the tradition, and then when do we have to be speaking as ourselves within the tradition. And I think more and more there's a recognition that it is only really possible to speak authentically from the second place, rather than imagining that you can speak truth and reality from a first place without your own frame. That's a really beautiful way of thinking about that. Well, so you have worked in this community for a long time, and how does that shape and frame how you choose what you report on, or how you shape what you report on? What does it mean to be in the community as well as reporting about the community?
I think, on a simple level, it means that I want what is best for this community. I think you'll see journalism sometimes that strikes me that it's coming from somewhat of a burn it down perspective, and I see how it benefits the journalist, or I see how it benefits the media outlet, but I'm not certain how it benefits the community. Which is not to say that that journalism is not critical, and that it doesn't scrutinize, and that it sometimes doesn't offend, but hopefully it's done with the heart for the community, and that you want what's best for the community, as opposed to this is going to be a resume builder so that I can then go on to the next place, or do the next thing, or win some meaningless award or whatever else. But truly, I mean, I want what is best for this community, which is not always going to be what I think is best, but it's what the community decides is best, because I'm raising a family here. I have 2 young girls. I want the best for them. I want great schools. I want safe streets. I want a healthy environment. I want a place where they can flourish. And that means that I am not a passive observer of what happens in the community. And that's another thing that I think journalism is finally unshackling itself from, this idea that journalists are solely passive observers of humanity.
Mm-hmm. So that's clear that you have cultivated a very strong sense of civic engagement for yourself, both from the side professionally, but also personally, and what we want for each of our families. What are the values that you bring into that understanding of what does it mean to be civically engaged? Why do you think we as people should do that?
I think back to the lessons that my parents instilled in me. I was very fortunate to have wonderful parents who were in turn raised by wonderful parents who were very civically engaged. And I think they just always said, look for the leaders and follow their example. And if you don't see one in the space that needs one, then be one, right? So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to put yourself at the center of everything. Lift up others where others are doing the best work. And if you see an opportunity to be of service to others, then take it.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. That's really, really beautiful. When you think about what does it mean to have a responsibility to an audience that you can't see all the time?
It's weird.
So we got a little taste of that during COVID when we streamed all of our services to an empty sanctuary and spoke very beautifully and meaningly to nobody. It was quite wonderful. But how do you think about that? Like, I know that you talk a lot about a viewer collaborative model. So how does that come into play when you're imagining who you're talking to? What does that mean for you?
I will say, the 2% of social media that is positive in the sense that it allows me to really know the people that I'm talking to on a nightly basis better than any journalist has ever known their audience, right? I mean, that feedback is instantaneous. And I think a lot of journalists tend to get bogged down in the negativity of it or the crudeness of it. That's always going to be there. What I appreciate is the accountability that it brings. If I get something wrong, I find out immediately. And that's such a gift, right? To not labor under the pretense of a false notion, right? To be able to be told right away by people who are engaging in good faith and sometimes with an extended middle finger, you're wrong. Which I appreciate both. Like, if I'm wrong and somebody wants to tell me that, like, they can make whatever hand gesture they want, because the most important thing is I figure out how we get it correct as soon as possible. So that's a gift, right? I know the nights that, I have my phone out there with me on the set, which is a poor choice, but I do it anyway. and the nights that it starts buzzing across the desk means that I've either done something really good or really stupid. And then I look down and I check and I find out which it is. But that's a gift. So it's not hard to sit in a room and talk to an inanimate object being a camera, because I know the people that I'm talking to. I know their faces, I know their names. That also is the wonderful thing about working in local journalism, is that you truly know the people that you're talking to and that you're accountable to those folks. And I think to the extent that journalists have lost the trust of Americans, it can be rebuilt from the bottom up, from local up to national. I do not think that there is a feasible way for national media to regain the trust of Americans. I think you do it by engaging with people who they know you. There's that level of accountability. People know that if you write to me, I will write back. If you can see me at the grocery store or at my kid's school drop-off or whatever else, and we have that accountability, that's where trust can happen even when there's disagreement.
Yeah. So that really sounds like it's a relational approach to what does it mean to trust media. What happens when we feel like we can't, whether it's local or national? And that is something that I think the Jewish community has struggled with, particularly over the last 2 years. On any side of the political spectrum, I think there is some fear about what does it mean to trust a story that is being projected in a particular way. What should we do? How do we handle that?
I think it's always fair to ask that the news not be about you, but to include you. People shouldn't be talked about on the news. They should be talked with on the news. And I think that's the key. And sometimes, right, journalists do that by mistake, by obliviousness. You don't know what you don't know. Sometimes people intentionally, make very bad choices, and those need to be corrected. But sometimes it's just done out of benign ignorance. And that's where people engaging in good faith to say, have you considered this perspective? I hear you saying this and this, but have you thought about this? That's the level of engagement that good journalists crave. We love it. I mean, that's the same kind of blessing that the text is saying,
dude, you're wrong, that number was way off, or you said the wrong person's name, or whatever else, that kind of thing, a good journalist should respond with, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. How do we tell a more complete, more accurate, more comprehensive story that includes as many point of views as possible, that doesn't fall into stereotypes or cliches or generalizations, but reflects the nuance with which people live their lives? And I don't think that most journalists ignore that out of malice, but out of just ignorance, right? Ignorance is not bad, it's just what you don't know, right? So I think that should be an invitation, I would hope, to outreach with journalists, to just say, please consider this perspective, please consider this nuance, please consider that when you say this, I hear this. That's very important for journalists to know, and ethical journalists will welcome that.
So what you're telling us is that you want us to be the ones texting you during your broadcast every single night.
Please.
I just want to make sure that we're clear. But no,
as the
thank
phone
you.
goes
Right,
across the
that's a
desk,
really strong charge, actually, for each of us to see ourselves engaged in that conversation also, and not just as confrontation, but actual conversation, and to be giving people grace and understanding for what they might not even know they want to learn in order to be able to grow themselves as people and grow their jobs also as well.
Yeah, I think pretty quickly, journalists, like anybody else, will expose themselves as either a good faith actor or a bad faith actor when you engage like that. So you'll know pretty soon, are you dealing with somebody who truly wants to do the best job representing the viewpoints of the community and accurately describing what's going on, or are you dealing with somebody that has other motives?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to pause for one moment to remind the congregation that Rabbi Hyatt and Steve Stark and Susan have cards that they are passing around. If you have questions, you are welcome to write questions down on the cards, and our staff will be walking around and collecting them. And as we get toward the end of our conversation, we'll be able to take some questions from the congregation. But given the size of the space, it's much more practical if we do it this way rather than attempt to walk a microphone around where we'd get to maybe like 2.5 people. So, this idea of trust and this idea of desired conversation, I know that's something that is very important to you just from having watched you talk and interview other people, which, by the way, is in no way intimidating at this moment in time, is this idea of accountability and honesty in a conversation. How do you see that when you are in conversation with a public official in terms of the value of honesty and accountability? Where do you feel like your role is in that place?
I really try my best not to judge anyone in public life based on their views, but I do judge them based on my perception of the sincerity of their views.
That's a distinction.
And I could totally understand somebody saying, like, how could you not come to a value judgment about somebody who has, this abhorrent view or that abhorrent view? At the end of the day, the community is going to realize what somebody's values are, and they're going to make a decision about whether they want that person representing them or not. But I feel like where my role comes in is to suss out the sincerity of somebody's viewpoints. So I give folks a lot of credit when they are intellectually consistent and when I think that they're intellectually honest. That does not mean that they say the same thing forever, right? I was talking with some municipal leaders, many of them elected from the Colorado Municipal League up in Breckenridge this year. And I said, if you show me someone who has been in public life for 20 years, who has never changed their mind about anything, I'll show you a blank. And I used a word that I will not use in a house of worship, but you can guess what that word is. It starts with dumb and ends with a body part. But anybody who is engaged in thought about the problems that face us for a long period of time is naturally going to come to different conclusions over time. And that's something that journalists should respect as opposed to playing gotcha. Right? Now, somebody's viewpoint changes week to week. Bear down, dig in, figure out why that is. When exactly did that happen? Was it a light switch? Was it a long evolution? But the idea that people's minds would change with experience, that's what we should expect. That's what we should hope for. We talked about this on the program the other night around the idea of, this is on Constitution Day. This is obviously a fraught time for the country. And the rise of political violence worries me really deeply. I think that we're close to some pretty bad stuff. And I think too many people hold on to this idea that America is magic and that we have some magical safeguard that will keep things from going off the rails. I don't believe that we do. And what I was encouraging people to look at, I try not to do history lectures because my other lectures are bad enough, but I try not to do history lectures on TV. But I did ask people to look at what Ben Franklin said on the day of the ratification of the Constitution. He was 81 years old. They carried him in a salon chair. He was too weak to read his own speech, but he handed it to a younger man to read aloud. And if anybody knows any line from his speech, it was the one about how he encouraged people to ratify the Constitution despite its faults. That he understood that they were signing on to a flawed document. But what he urged of his colleagues, the other founders, was to have humility. And he exhorted them to have some doubt about the rightness of your own views. Because what he said is, through a long life engaged on issues, he talked about how he had changed his own mind. And on profound issues, he had changed his mind. He didn't say slavery, but that's what he meant. And he basically said, if I have changed my mind on the most profound issues of our day, please have some doubt in your deeply held beliefs and allow that humility to lead us to compromise. And my message to the viewers who were watching that night was, be like the founders. Show humility, seek compromise. Because I think we tend to think of the founders as like these brash young men who, fought off a king, which of course they did. But then they were left to decide amongst themselves, how do you weave together factions? And the oldest man in the room said, take it from the guy who's changed his mind. Be less sure, have some doubt, show some grace, have some humility, and seek compromise.
Beautiful. You have been here for a while in Denver and have been involved in media for a long time. So in that spirit of change and renewal, what are some of the exciting trends that you're seeing in the media world? It's so easy for us to bemoan what we see as destructive or what we see as difficult, but where are some of the seeds that can grow? What are you seeing?
That is a very difficult question because it is very hard for me to be optimistic about it.
Why?
I think American media has picked a really bad time to collapse financially, which people will often link to the declining trust in media and the current political environment, but they are two very separate issues that have a bit of overlap. But truly, the financial model that has supported journalism for the last few generations in America is coming into its twilight. And it's coming into its twilight at a really fraught time. And I think that increases the level of danger. If I'm looking for optimism, I would say that this community in particular has shown a willingness to support new forms of journalism. Colorado's media ecosystem is a lot healthier than a lot of other places in terms of startup journalism, digital journalism. If I might be so brash to say that we have a nightly program on a network affiliate in Denver that speaks truth to power in a way that is not allowed by a lot of different station groups, that is actively engaged in community building like Word of Thanks, not just giant check presentations, but we, as of the current day, October 2nd, 2025, I work for people who allow me to speak truth to power and to do meaningful community building. And I don't think that we should take that for granted just because it's not going to last forever.
Really hard. Some of the themes of our day, and just to circle back to some of what you have said before and bring it into connection with the difficult moment we're in. When we talk about this day of Yom Kippur, we're really talking about our existential questions. Why are we here? How do we handle when things look bleak? And one of the answers in our text is a line that says, when things look like all is lost, if you focus on prayer, repentance, and giving, that those can help walk through that moment. We're not going to talk so much about prayer. We tend not to grill people on their prayer life publicly on the bima. But when you were talking about what does it mean to bring honesty and accountability, when something is wrong, what are the steps that you, as a person who really feels that pull to accountability and transparency, what do you like to do when you feel like there is repentance to be had?
I think you act, right? I think you act. I think that it's so vitally important in this moment for people to not allow themselves to be preemptively silenced or to give up the power that they have. I think that there are a lot of forces at work in the world and in our country right now that are betting that people will preemptively surrender their power and their voice. And I think that it is important that people do not do that. Now, that doesn't say, and that's not to say you don't take a beat, you don't take care of yourself, but if you are in the least bit able, be in the arena. Yeah. Be in the arena. And I see so many wonderful people who have contributed to our community over the last 10 years who have decided to withdraw. Things have become too toxic, too angry, too dangerous. And I think it's important, I can just speak as a journalist, for journalists to continue doing the work, even the work that prompts violent threats, even the work that makes people angry, because if we withdraw through self-censorship, by leaving the arena, then you cede that space to people who do not have the community's best interests at heart. So I would plead with anybody, no matter where you are and what you do, to the extent that you can, stay in the arena, stay involved, stay loud, and that's the only shot we're gonna have.
Oh, thank you. That's really beautiful. So that was repentance, but the third one is giving. And I think that is something that I know you have a passion for, and we talked a little bit about the Word of Thanks program. I would love to, if you could share with people, like, how did that even come into fruition? Where did that come from?
Sure. So we launched our what we called Word of Thanks micro giving during the lockdown period of the pandemic. So you were talking into a camera here.
That's right.
I was talking into a camera in my basement. I had that wood circle behind me on the wall, and folks felt powerless, right? You were at home, you knew that there was hurting outside, but yet you couldn't physically go to be with people, and folks just felt very limited and very isolated. And we heard, especially from nonprofits in our community, that they were really in difficult shape. And a colleague made the suggestion to me that maybe there's something that you could be doing on the show to raise awareness about nonprofits. And it was a very well-intended suggestion, but I kind of bristled at the word awareness, because to me, awareness is not action. Or maybe it's the first step in action, but I thought, well, if we want to take action, let's take action. And what these nonprofits need at this moment, what they need is funding. Are we in a position to give them funding? Traditionally, as journalists look at things, the answer would be no, not your job. You are to observe, you are to report, you are not to get involved. Except for when the station manager tells you we're all going to volunteer some Saturday or whatever, and then you get involved, and then there's a big photo at the end, you know? So maybe there's a better way to do this. So we just decided to test drive this idea of what would happen if we picked a cause, vetted it for financial stability and strong leadership and strong past outcomes and a strong plan of how they would use the resources. And then we asked people to give. What would happen if we asked people to give $5? And, you know, it drives me up the wall when I see people on TV, just based on their outfit, that you can tell they've got a well-paying job, and they suggest that somebody at home gives their money to something That drives me up the wall. So the deal was, if you give $5, I'll match the first 50 people to do that, so I've got some skin in the game, and let's do this. Let's see what we can do. And the very first week, we suggested that we raise for the Civic Center Conservancy. This was not long after some of the social media protests had devolved into some riots downtown. There's an attempt to burn the McNichols building, burn some police vehicles. There's graffiti. The Civic Center Park was in bad shape. And what we said is, listen, this is a place for the community, for gathering, and for reflection. It's also a place for protest. That doesn't mean that you get to try and burn down city buildings. They're looking at about $100,000 in repairs, and that's money that they currently don't have. Would you chip in $5? And that night, the community raised $90,000. And I was just like, well, holy cow, we've got something here. What are we going to do with this? And at that point, we said, all right, well, we'll keep going as long as you're willing to keep going. And I thought, all right, this is going to be a really busy 3 months, but we can do this. And this is week 278.
Yeah.
But we continue to offer the opportunity because people continue to take it. And it has been far and away the most rewarding thing that I've been able to do as a journalist. And it has kept me in the game. And the idea that every week that people are looking to us for a suggestion of how we can do good. And often I kind of feel like, and I don't say this with any disrespect to my colleagues, and we have great disagreements about this in the newsroom, but I have a very strong ethical disagreement with the litany of tragedy that you see on the evening news that tells you that the 10 most important things that happened in Colorado were the 10 worst things that happened in Colorado today, followed by news, weather, sports, and then an animal story at the end. And I think some people, including some journalists, would just say, hey man, it's what happened. You know, it's what happened, it's what happened. No, we chose that. We chose that. We're making choices. And we're choosing to tell people this is what the news is and this is what you should pay attention to. And we've tried to do something a little bit different with Next, and that we don't feature the litany of tragedy model. And that also, you will hear 10 reasons every night on the news why you should fear your neighbors. And then Word of Thanks will come on, and we'll realize that most people are good and that they want to help other people. They want to help people they've never met. They want to pour into communities that they have never set foot in and may never set foot in. Rural areas helping the heart of the city, people on the Front Range helping the Western Slope, week after week after week. It's not a fluke. People want to help their neighbors. They want to follow those leaders that are already showing the way and doing good in the community. So this will probably get me in trouble, but I don't think the boss is here. I see our charitable microgiving as a rebuttal to the rest of the news. And it's a demonstration of the values of the community, because I don't think that the values of our community are often demonstrated in the headlines on the news. And I think that the values of our community are demonstrated in the fact that this week, as Loveland wrestles with what to do with their only overnight homeless shelter, and they took it down on Monday and Tuesday, and now they're going to meet tonight to figure out if they should put it back up because they can't figure out what to do. I can't solve that problem for them. That's not my business. What we can do is we can say, hey everybody, have you ever heard of the House of Neighborly Service? Started as a ministerial alliance in the 1960s, longtime nonprofit in that community. What they do is they keep families in crisis from falling into unsheltered homelessness, with help for today, food, clothing, transportation to job interviews, help for tomorrow, long-term counseling to figure out what is at the root of dysfunction and crisis in families. How can we bring them back from the brink so that they don't fall into unsheltered homelessness? Hey everybody, here's something that we can do while the news tells you this is coming apart at the seams. And people are giving to that as we speak right now. And the fact that Word of Thanks, through the generosity of our viewers, has built itself into a very reliable $50,000 a week force for good somewhere in our state means that we don't just show up with a camera and allow people to spectate at others' misfortune. We show up with an army of people willing to do good, to lift up communities, and I think that is a reflection of Colorado, not necessarily just the worst of what's happening.
Beautiful, really beautiful. Thank you. And that really is our message, right? It's not, from what I can tell from the way you talk about it so passionately and the way that people are responding so passionately, it's not just about the individual giving, it is about the reinforcement that they can see that other people also want this.
Yes.
And it helps shift and change your worldview. And that's why we sit here in community on Yom Kippur. A lot of the project that we talk about on our holiday today is individual. We don't need each other to do it. We could sit in our living rooms and repent on our own, in our pajamas, without being here in boots. But it is a much more powerful thing to watch everyone do it all together and to feed on the energy. And that's such a beautiful thing that you are bringing to other people, is the understanding and the connection through that.
Yes, yes, it's an opportunity, no matter what the news of the week is, to know that at the end of the week that you took action that improved someone's life. Now, chances are you did that in 100 ways, known and unknown, but it's a very tangible way for our viewers to know every week they are involved in intentional community building somewhere in our state, and that there are grateful people out there because of the work that they've done. And then we do it again next week. We don't just do it for the holidays, we do it every week. And it's because the need is there all of the time, but the goodness is there all the time.
You're such a religious journalist. That's a beautiful way of thinking about that. Well, that's a great transition to some of our questions that we have from our congregation. Sure. One of which is, there is a 17-year-old here who is thinking about a career in journalism. What advice would you give that person at this moment?
Ooh. You can decide for yourself whether you want it to be 1A or 1B, but you need to have two consecutive plans. I think the future of journalism is very uncertain financially. I think the future of journalism is very uncertain from a cultural standpoint. I think it is a noble thing to want to go into journalism. It would be an irresponsible thing for me to suggest that somebody should make that their life plan. That said, you do not need a license to be a journalist in America. You do not need a degree to be a journalist in America. You need to have a willingness to abide by the standards of journalism. So anytime I meet somebody who says, I'm thinking about majoring in journalism, I say, congratulations, that's wonderful. I hope I work with you someday. Please make it your minor.
We can have a conversation another time about whether that's also something to say to people who want to be clergy today, but that's okay. It's a lot. It's a lot to think about. What does it mean to go into civic professions at this moment? When we're thinking about professions also around education, and really things that tie our deepest values together, and how can we make sure that those become so much more valued and more supported in our community?
Yeah, and I would just also say, because we talk about this a lot in journalism, because a lot of people are wrestling with whether to leave journalism these days. A lot of great journalists have left journalism, some by choice, some because their outlets have downsized or been acquired by the TV station across the street. And I think there used to be a shame associated with leaving journalists, and it was something that we put on ourselves or put on each other, that it's this calling that you're stepping away from. You can act on your values so many different ways in this world, and it does not just have to be one profession. So to the young aspiring journalists in the room, focus on the values that led you to want to be a journalist, figure out where else you could bring those to bear, and work on both of those tracks at once. And that's also what I'm telling myself and every other journalist in our newsroom. What is your secondary track where you can live your values and make an impact?
That is extraordinarily sound advice, and also, just being very honest, very sad. It's very sad.
It is, yeah, but there's no reason to pretend like it's anything else, right? Because I think both of us work in professions that are rooted in honesty, and that you want people to have an honest understanding of what's happening so that they can make good decisions guided by their values. And the last thing that I would want to do is to mislead anybody, whether it's a member of the public or somebody who aspires to be a journalist.
Beautiful. Well, so to that point, do you feel, another question from our congregation, do you feel like to be a journalist today, you have to feel brave?
Yeah, to do some journalism, yeah.
Is that something that you feel like shows up in your arena?
No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think like you say brave, I say like calculated risk. Like, I mean, and this is tough for me to talk about. I don't love the risk that it causes for my family. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know, firefighters are brave, police officers are brave. Journalists do a job that opens them to risk from deranged individuals. That's different than brave. That's just we live in a sick world.
I would just say to you, reflecting back, as also a parent of young kids who spend some time in the public eye and worries about what I say and how that impacts their safety, focusing on truth is always brave. And whether or not we want to take that upon ourselves as a moniker, you should know that other people feel that way.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So leaning into that a little bit.
Sure.
As a parent of young kids.
Yeah.
How do you help them understand what you know to be true about the world around you right now?
After we talked about bravery, can I give you an absolutely cowardly answer?
100%. Yeah.
I am absolutely skating on the fact that my girls are too young.
Yeah. For those of us who don't have that option.
Yeah. I have no advice. I have no advice for you because if so, I'd be putting into practice with my oldest, who's a second grader, and I'm not. So.
Yeah. It's very difficult, and it's something that actually, as an educator, you have to make choices about.
Yep.
When is the moment where truth and awareness is what comes in, and when is the moment where to keep them feeling safe just a little bit longer is your responsibility as a parent.
Yep. And it's interesting because I do think about that a lot as a journalist. Like, is there ever a time when I would not tell the public the truth for that reason? And if there was such an occasion, I haven't found it. But I do think that it's important that when you tell people the truth that's scary, you also remind them of all the resources that we have, what surrounds them, their own courage, their own supports, so that people don't feel alone.
What do you hope your girls understand about what you do?
Oh boy, I didn't think we were going to do this for an extended period of time.
This is called public pastoral counseling. I'm having a great time right now.
They know their dad tries to help people. Yeah, that's all. Yeah, I mean, because the thing is, the part of my job that they most interface with, and this, I'm going to dig myself out of the emotional hole this way by ignoring your question and going over here.
Good technique. That's right.
They don't watch the program because they are of the age that they think that every screen is interactive. So they watched the program a couple times, got mad that daddy isn't talking back to them and just talking over them, and they told my wife that they don't want to call me like that anymore. So they don't watch the program, but they do hear me on the phone all the time setting up our Word of Thanks microgiving campaigns. And they'll see me break away on a Saturday when they're at the park to go shoot a video to post on social media to ask people to donate, and they see that. So they understand that to be my job. And that's easy to explain, These people need food, we're gonna help them get food. These people need houses, we're gonna help them get houses, that kind of thing. So that's what they know.
Yeah, that makes you feel better when my children are little and were watching me on streaming. They tried to swipe me away rather than talk to me. So I think you have one up on me there.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so circling back a little bit to when we think about how we figure out what's best for the community, how do you make that call? Like, what are the things that you decide or that you decide you're going to research in order to make those choices?
I just try to listen to folks, and I try to listen to as many perspectives as I can, and some of them I can listen to in person, and some I can listen to remotely, and I try to read voraciously of what other people are writing, and I try as hard as possible to seek out viewpoints that don't necessarily align with my own, or more importantly, to seek out experiences that don't align with my own, so I can try to understand those perspectives. And then at the end of the day, to just try and figure out, if the community seems to have a general consensus about things, but yet elected leaders seem to be going in a different direction. It doesn't mean that they're wrong, but it does require more explanation, and then the community can assess whether that's the right direction or not, you know? But also there are gonna be other times where it seems like the community and leadership are all moving in one direction, and then there are some other red flags, and then you hold that up to scrutiny. But anytime I start to see things diverge between where the community appears to be and where leadership appears to be going, that to me is a place to say, hold on, let's stop and talk about this some more so that we can kind of better understand where everybody is.
Beautiful. So when we were talking about the danger of news really folding, how can we safeguard that? What can we be doing now to try to make a more optimistic story for journalism and for local news in particular?
It's a good question. I think, you know, I'll start with the economics, right? Journalism is not free to produce. And that's how we've gotten ourselves into this current moment. People's interest in journalism, like trust in media has waned, some of it very rightly, I think some of it wrongly. Interest in information has not waned. We're more addicted to information than we have ever been before, right? Take somebody's phone away for 4 hours and they go up the wall, right? People crave information. They just expect it to be delivered for free. And you can get information delivered to you for free by people who have a vested interest in manipulating what you think of something. But if you want journalists who are paid to try and discern the best available version of the truth and then bring that to you, that requires those people being able to feed their families. So I guess I would just say, you know, if you value journalism and journalists, then please actually do value it, right? And that means different things to different people, right? I work in commercial television, which means I don't ask you for money, except for a word of thanks. I don't ask you for money, but I do ask you for your time, which then supports our advertisers. Advertisers then pay for journalism, and I am proud to say that in 18 years at 9 News, I have never once witnessed an advertiser or an outside influence mess with one of my stories, not once. And I would encourage you to ask other journalists if that's the case where they work. Because that firewall doesn't always hold up. But I have watched it hold strong for 18 years because I work for ethical people. And to that I would also say, I get the sense that a lot of people in this room are very civically engaged. And I'm guessing a number of you have reached out to a journalist before. I know a number of you have reached out to me before. The next time you're tempted to send a nice note to a journalist, send it to their boss. Because their boss is the one standing behind their work when the mayor's office calls, or when an advertiser calls, or when angry people show up outside the station. It's the boss who's dealing with that. It's the editor, it's the publisher, it's the news director, it's the general manager. And journalists get a lot of hate, but journalists also get a lot of nice notes. I appreciate every one. My boss doesn't get a lot of nice notes. But without him doing what he does, it'd be over for me tomorrow. So no matter who that is and whatever media outlet that is, if you're gonna drop a nice note to a journalist, send it to their boss who stands behind their work.
I have 2 more questions.
Okay.
And here's
Are
where we
either of them about my children or their safety?
I was going to say, here's where we
Okay.
come to the really, really tricky one.
Oh, boy. Okay.
What I was going to say is, here's how I know what time it is on Yom Kippur, because the last 2 questions I have from our congregation are about food. So clearly that's where everyone's mind is.
I got 2 pieces of advice walking in here today, and both of them were just don't mention food in any passing conversation.
Great, so it's already here in the room. So here's my first question from a very, very concerned congregant. Does matzo ball soup with veggies, noodles, and a matzo ball fall into the soup category or the stew category?
Yeah. The
Go
real
ahead.
ones know.
That's right.
The real ones know. We had this out on the show the other night. Our meteorologist, Chris Bianchi, declared that it was going to be soup weather. He asked me for my favorite soup. I told him it was New England clam chowder. I stand by the choice. And then our...
Probably also not something to say on our Bima, but that's fine. It's okay. That's all right. I'll give you that.
If this is the first time I've transgressed, I feel like I'm
All
doing
good.
okay.
All good. That's right.
I find myself to be unintentionally transgressive on a frequent basis, no matter where I am. But so that was my answer, to which our producer, Mallory, got in my ear. And what did she say about that choice? Something about that choice was like, does anybody remember what it was? Thank you. She said it's psychotic that you would list that as your choice. To which I then challenged her on live television because, what better are we going to use the 30 minutes for? I don't know, Mallory, why don't you do some live TV? Why don't you tell me what your favorite soup is? To which she stammered and then replied, chili, which is not a soup. Which is not a soup. And I said so. And that then immediately, my phone starts to go across the desk. Left, right, center, everybody has an opinion on this, and they're weighing in like crazy. So I thought, you know what, listen, let's do some big J journalism, that Uncle Walter would be proud of. And I called out to the newsroom and I said, can you wheel in a whiteboard and a marker for the last segment, in which I drew on the board, here are your soups, which are mainly a 70% liquid to 30% stuff ratio, versus your stews and chilies, which are 30% liquid to 70% stuff. And again, like I tell my kids, Daddy helps people, right?
That's right.
I'm trying to help people with this. But again, so no, matzo ball soup would be a soup because it's closer to the 70-30 ratio than the 30-70.
Wow. Well, thank you for not making me do a survey to our congregation about where our opinions on soup and stew via matzo balls is. Okay, last question. Okay. Someone in our congregation has heard that you are a home beer brewer, that you like micro brews.
I was a long time ago.
You were a long time ago. Okay.
Then I had kids.
Yes, less good to have that lying around. Yeah, but they would like to know what your favorite brew is.
Oh, that's probably too hard. Well, how can I wriggle out of this question? Let me talk about favorite breweries.
Great.
How about that?
That's a great
idea. How about
idea.
that? So, and this actually kind of brings us back where we started, because to me, right, breweries are, they're just another third space, right? They're all about community. How do you build community in a space where people want to be? And it really helps if the beer is good. It helps tremendously. But I will tell you, and folks know, there are also places that make wonderful beer that are very inhospitable places, and you don't go there because you can find a good beer in a lot of places. But your congregant asked for specifics, so I will endeavor to do that. Two spaces in Denver that I really love being in to have a beer and be in community with people are Cerebral on Colfax. They make wonderful beer. They're very friendly people. And I love that they take a science-first approach to what they do. They revel in the nerdery of it. They revel in the science of it. And then another is Cohesion. They are at 40th and York. Oh, I got claps for Cohesion. I'm going to tell them that. I was at Temple Emanuel and I got claps. And why do I love what they do? They do one thing and they do it well. They make Czech lagers, which means that they're not making big splashy IPAs or stouts or high alcohol things. They make, very low alcohol beers that you can sit on the porch and have a couple of with your friends or family. And they have a wonderful, beautiful space. They're always very welcoming. And they're uncompromising in that they are very strict about the way they make their beer, but they're very approachable about sharing it with people. And I feel like as a journalist, that's something that I try to do. I'm very strict about the way that I do my work, but I try to have an open mind in engaging with people about it, that I welcome everyone to it. And I see them do that in their space, and it's a space that I love to go to because I feel welcome.
Beautiful. Well,
thank you for making me feel welcome here.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I will just say, to bring us to a close, thank you for taking the time to be here. Thank you for all of your thoughtful answers, but really and truly, thank you for being so vulnerable, and thank you for being so honest with all of us today. We really feel that quite deeply, and that is our project today, is how do we find what really matters and what helps us walk through the rest of this world knowing where we want our rails to be. So.
Well, I appreciate it very much. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the conversation. We can truly say, right, we laughed, we cried. We spent some time together, at least I did. No, thank you so much for the invitation. I hope everyone has an easy fast and a meaningful Yom Kippur. Thank you for allowing me to be part of your day.
Thank you.